Chairman Snyder, we are live on YouTube and you may begin the meeting when you're ready. Thank you.
Thank you very much for this and all your work. You're absolutely essential, and we do, so thank you. I call to order the Northern Virginia Transportation Authority Transportation Technology Committee on February 10, 2021. Thanks for everyone attending. A quick roll here, Mackenzie, or do you have a good list of the attendees? Keith, how do you want to proceed with that?
Chairman, we have a list of the participants in the WebEx platform, and I can take notes of that for the official record as we go. Great,
thank you very much. So the first order of business is the resolution finding a need to conduct a meeting by electronic communication means during governor's declared state of emergency during the COVID-19 pandemic. And the resolution is there in the materials. It basically cites the ongoing emergency authority by the legislature and compliance with the Virginia Freedom of Information Act. So I would entertain a motion to approve the resolution finding the need to conduct the meeting virtually.
So moved, Chair Snyder.
Thank you.
Seconded.
Thank you. That's Mayor Rischel. And who was the second?
Jim Kolb.
Jim Kolb, thank you so very much. All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Okay, that item will be recorded as having been approved unanimously. Now I'll go back to Keith Jasper to quickly review our agenda, and to then the next action item will be the meeting summary. Keith, you want to review the agenda quickly?
Thanks, Chairman Snyder. Yes, I mean, if members could take action on the meeting summary for January 13th, then I can dive straight into where we are with the strategic plan.
Okay, great.
Mackenzie's put them on the screen now, and they were included in the packet.
Great, Mackenzie, thank you. So you have the summary notes in front of everyone. Any questions or comments? Okay, there being none, I'd entertain a motion to approve the meeting summary of the January 13 meeting.
So moved.
Okay, who moved? I'm sorry. Who moved the approval of the summary notes?
Jim Kolb will do it, I guess.
Jim.
Someone else spoke up, but
yeah. Thank you very much, Jim. You get 2 gold stars now.
Woo.
Thank you. And is there a second?
I'll second it.
Thank you. Yep, that much. Thank you very much. Any discussion? All those in favor signify by saying aye. Aye.
Aye.
Opposed?
Aye.
Okay, the summary notes have been approved unanimously. Thank you very much. Keith, back to you.
Thank you, Chairman Snyder, and good morning, everybody. I hope it isn't an ordeal, as the third Monday title would suggest. I'm aware Ms. Lynott has to leave at 9 a.m. So we have a very brief presentation here, which is really just a discussion guide. It's not included in your packet. We're going to whistle through this pretty fast just to set up the context for the conversation. So Mackenzie, if you could advance to the next slide. Basically, at this point, we want to begin to introduce the action plan associated with the draft Transportation Technology Strategic Plan. But before I do that, I just wanted to kind of recap how we are considering getting a pathway to approval of this document. So you may remember we sent out the core content of the TTSP in December, and we also shared that with our committee of jurisdiction and agency staff, the RJAC. So the core content comprised 8 strategies, 9 NVTA roles, and 3 core values. In January, at your meeting last month, we talked about that, and in addition, the contextual information was added. So you got a fuller version of the document at last month's meeting. You provided some great feedback both before, during, and after that meeting. And we kind of drew a line in the sand at the end of January with that iteration. We have not shared with you the updated version of that because during February and March, we're moving to an expanded review involving several of our other committees. We have 3 in particular that we want to share the material with: our Technical Advisory Committee, the TAC, the Planning Coordination Advisory Committee, the PCAC or PCAC. These 2 committees are both statutorily required by our founding legislation, and in addition, the Planning and Programming Committee, which is the committee that typically kind of consolidates all the committee's inputs and makes recommendations to the full authority. So that will be happening during February and March. Whereas this committee has had the benefit of getting on for 2 years of contributing to the build-up of this document, the other committees have had no exposure to it whatsoever. So it's going to be a bit of a stretch perhaps to get through that process in 2 months, but I think we're starting from a great position with all the help we've had from the TTC. So that's going to be going on during February and March, and in parallel, we're developing the action plan. In fact, it is substantially developed already. We haven't shared it with you for a couple of reasons, mostly because we wanted to give you the opportunity to kind of understand what it is we're looking for from the action plan before we actually dropped it on you. It's currently a 23-page document, and it might get a little bit longer before you see it. So we don't want to overwhelm you with lots and lots of review material if we can avoid it. Just looking to the pathway in April, depending on how things go with the various committees, including this one, we'll be looking to present something to the authority for consideration and approval in April of this year. And if that happens, then from May onwards, we'll begin implementing the action plan. There are some early actions, not the least of which is to begin the process of integrating the relevant parts of the action plan and the strategic plan in general into transaction, our long-range transportation plan for Northern Virginia, which is ramping up to a consultant kickoff in the fairly near future. Next slide, please. So the action plan, and we've talked about this before, the strategic plan, great as it is, will not really accomplish much if there's not a corresponding action plan. So this is where the rubber hits the road, I guess. So the action plan will comprise of what, when, and who predominantly, what actions we're going to implement, when are we going to implement them, and most importantly of all, probably who's responsible for implementing them. We consider the actions must be traceable to at least one strategy so that we can all understand why we're doing them. And each action has got to have some sort of measure of effectiveness so we understand how we're performing as we proceed. Some actions may be under our control. Others may be triggered by external events, particularly changes in legislation, changes in the marketplace, and there could be many other things that are external that trigger us to take action at particular points in time. Whatever the action is, whatever the strategy is for that matter, we think most actions will be initiated by NVTA staff, but not all of them can be implemented by NVTA staff. Some of them will require authority approval. Some of them will involve collaborating with other member jurisdictions, other regional entities, and so on. But everything we consider is pretty much going to start with NVTA staff initiating actions. We want to define a monitoring plan and a review and update cycle to include in the action plan as well. Mackenzie will talk a little bit more about that in just a moment. Next slide. In fact, Mackenzie's going to talk about it right now. So I'll hand over to her to talk through over the next couple of slides the proposed structure of the action plan and other content related matters. Mackenzie?
Great, thanks, Keith. Yes, so the first thing to cover is what is the structure of the action plan. This is a basic outline of what the document would look like. First, it would start, which would be integrated into the larger transportation technology strategic plan. It would have its own introduction section, kind of providing a framework of the topics to be covered. Again, it goes over the content that will be addressed for each of the strategies, including who are the responsible parties, what are the metrics of success and things like that, giving a broad overview of how they will be addressed. And then it moves into strategy-specific summaries. This is essentially a brief summary for each of the 8 strategies identified in the TTSP as a whole. And for each of those strategies, it provides an overview, meaning an idea of when we anticipate there will be action needed on that strategy, and what kind of time frame we anticipate developments happening. And it talks about some assumptions made. What does that mean? It could talk about how we anticipate what assumptions are made in the timeframes of the technology's development. For example, we anticipate autonomous vehicles will be at a certain rate of market penetration in X many years. And some of these are quite loose because of uncertainty in the development of the technology or the acceptance of the public. And some of them are more firm. For example, we expect some legislation around X timing, and that varies with each strategy and in some extents in regard to each type of technology. The summaries also go over an action plan specific to each strategy, and that provides some granular detail about actions to be taken, which party be responsible for each of the said actions, and what some specific measures of success will be. And I'll go over give you an example of the structure of that in just a few moments. After each of the 8 strategies are summarized, we'll go into a consolidated action table that collapses information from each of the strategies into one large chart, so you can get a visual overview of when NVTA would be moving forward with any steps associated with all strategies and get an idea of where there may be synergies across them. Finally, we come to a next step section that will discuss a monitoring cycle and a review and update process, and I'll give you a bit more information about that next. This is an example of the structure of a strategy-specific summary. As you can see, it has the overview here, which will generally be about a paragraph or so. So we're keeping high-level detail to accommodate any uncertainty or unknowns around the technology or their adoption. Then it will have approximately 2 to 5 bullet points about the assumptions that are made. Again, high level, and trying to acknowledge the things that we have about a good understanding of and the things that we'll need more detail about and need to be flexible with as we move forward. Finally, it has the strategies specific action plan that I mentioned to you, and this takes a table format so that it's easily accessible to the viewer, but allows for a level of granularity that is necessary in bringing these strategies to fruition. We'll cover the responsible party, the trigger point, and this could be something like the introduction of a new technology to market, or perhaps a legislative initiative, the time frame in which we anticipate either the trigger point happening or action taking place on behalf of NVTA. The current status could be where are these where are these trigger points or technologies mentioned already in other NVTA initiatives and or around the region. We'll go through a few actions, and these actions will be tied to stakeholders, and this will be very much in keeping with what you've already seen in the Transportation Technology Strategic Plan as a whole. And finally, we'll provide some metrics of success, which could range from things like the creation and the beginning of conversations in the region, all the way to the creation and adoption of policies, depending on what the strategy is. After we've seen all of those summaries, they will all be collapsed into this single table, which I understand is a bit large for your screen. I'm going to try to zoom back a little bit so you can see it more. Please know that we don't expect you to be able to read this right now, and you'll receive a copy for further review in the future. But basically, it would go through the strategies on this far left column, then all of the granular actions that are covered in the action plan, and then tie each of those to a specific time frame, either falling into the immediate future, near term, midterm, or long term. And we will put we'll put indicators in here for when we anticipate action may be happening, which is indicated in this green. When we think there might be lead up action, which has this green hash mark, and that could be any sort of preparatory work like research or staying apprised of developments in the field. And any follow-up action, which is indicated in this blue hashed color here, and that might be staying up to date on any advocacy issues or work, for example. The small flags indicate where we think there may be a particular trigger point. These should be noted that they should be flexible in most cases, and the flags are color-coded to indicate different types of triggers. For example, the green flags indicate something associated with the transaction process, and we have a pretty firm idea of when those things are going to happen, but there's other items like external triggers, and that could be market adoption or federal legislative action that might be a little bit more flexible. And this tries to give a good overview through the years, through January 2021 all the way out to 2030 and beyond. And so it definitely varies in detail there, but we want to give you a full scope of what we anticipate might be happening there. Finally, we go into a bit more detail about the plan for monitoring and updating the action plan itself. We anticipate that the action plan will be updated approximately once a year on the anniversary of, or on or around the anniversary of its adoption. But there are other items that might prompt us to do an update as well. We've listed 3 of them here for you, and just to give you an idea, if we were to develop and adopt a new iteration of transaction, that would of course cause, give us cause for review of the actions that are suggested by the Transportation Technology Strategic Plan and its action plan. If there was adoption or enaction of any federal or Commonwealth level laws that directly pertain to technology, that would of course prompt a review and perhaps an update as well, depending. Or if there are any relevant actions of member jurisdictions, we would of course go back and make sure the plan is consistent and that we are all in harmony in that regard, which may also prompt an update. I think that covers the update cycle, so I'm going to turn this back over to Keith to give you a little bit more closing information on the next steps.
Thanks, Mackenzie. So our plan here is to share the draft action plan with you within or by the end of next week. In all likelihood, we'll share it before then, since it is substantially complete. But we just wanted to hear what you had to say today before we kind of pull the trigger on that one. Whenever it does go out, we'll give you a 2-week response deadline if that is acceptable. If it's not, we can vary that to suit your schedules. But that's our initial thought. We'll be sharing the draft TTSP with the committees that I mentioned earlier during their February meeting cycle. And essentially what we're going to be giving to the committees is something closer to what you saw in December. We don't want to overwhelm them in their first exposure to the TTSP. So we're going to kind of step it out in February and then look hopefully for some recommendations in March from these three committees, the TAC, the PCAC, and the PPC. I'm going to mention in passing well, actually more than in passing, the NOVA Transportation Roundtable, which we are organising and hosting virtually on March 10th. I know several committee members have already registered for that, and we thank you for doing that. If you haven't registered and you think you might be interested, please let Mackenzie or I know directly. We do have an event registration page, but we actually had to close it last night because we were on the point of maxing out the capacity for the meeting. So we have a standby list which we will fill. But if you're interested and available, then please let one of us know. And the reason specifically I mentioned that is not to plug the roundtable so much as to say that the content I think is going to be really relevant to the TTC and the TTSP. In that the first panel will be looking at what's going on right now with technology deployments in the region and Commonwealth. And the second panel is going to be something which is slightly different to anything we've done before, which will be looking at different aspects of resilience and sustainability in the broader context of our long-range plan update. So we are hoping to have speakers talking about the Transportation Climate Initiative, talking about electrification of the transportation system, and hopefully congestion pricing in New York City as well. So some pretty broad things, more policy focused than technical, but I think in the middle of all that, we're going to have a mini session, I'm calling it, where we actually do want to ask a couple of structured questions through polling on things that are pertinent to the TTSP and the action plan, to get input from a broader audience of people who are not that engaged with it at the moment. And then finally, we're suggesting March 24th as the next meeting of this committee to kind of hear your feedback and discuss your feedback and next steps regarding a recommendation to the authority in April. So that'll be a pretty pivotal meeting on March 24th, or if we don't do it on March 24th, whenever it works to the the general approval of the committee. So my final slide, which we'll just leave on the screen to kick off the conversation. And Jana, I know you've got to go in 3 minutes. We've listed 5 questions here. That I guess the last question is actually 2 questions, so 6 really. This is what we want to hear, and this is more more process related than content related, because we haven't actually shared the content of the action plan with you yet. So thoughts on what you've heard so far today, beyond our committees. Are there other people or organizations we should be seeking feedback from? Are there other related initiatives that we should be aware of? And there are a lot listed in the document we've already shared with you. And Kathy, we know you've mentioned something in Virginia Beach that we wanted to follow up with you on as well, because I don't think we've documented what that is yet. And significantly, the last 2 items of feedback are recognizing that the TTSP and the action plan combined are closing in on 100 pages. When we think about sharing this with, on a public facing basis with folks who have not been involved with it over 2 years, what's the right level of detail for a public-facing effort of an initiative of this nature? We don't have deep resources for this, so if there are any visualizations you can suggest that are in the low cost range, and particularly any examples you can point us to for communicating the messaging which is in the TTSP, we're all ears. We'd love to hear more about that. Chairman Snyder, with that, I'll pause and be happy to take any questions. I'm especially happy to hear any feedback you can give us. Thank you.
Sure. Thanks, Mackenzie and Keith, for the presentations. Questions from folks, particularly anyone who has to leave in the next couple minutes. Any in particular that you want to mention?
Am I off mute now?
You are.
Okay, thank you. Since I do apologize that I have to leave early, but I wanted to just say that I thought the format of the action plan that we've been talking about is excellent. I like the concise nature of putting all the information in there. I was curious as to, in terms of the actions themselves, like at what level are those going to be presented? So for instance, is a particular data specification or data standard, is that an action to try to get that in, or is it part of a larger type of project? And then my final question is whether we as committee members can make any kind of recommended actions that would go into that.
Yeah, I mean, I think those are good questions. Keith, Mackenzie, initial reactions?
Yes, Jana, thanks for that very much. Absolutely, we would be very pleased to hear suggestions and recommendations from committee members. Obviously, they've got to be traceable back to a strategy. But yeah, that aside, I think we would most welcome that. In terms of the level of detail of the actions themselves, how they'll be worded, I think it will vary depending on the strategy and how far into the future the particular action is. So something that is near term related to planning that NVTA staff can handle, might be quite detailed. But I think something that's looking to 2030 and beyond, it could almost be in the category of being worded as a kind of like a placeholder for something to happen in the future. So I think it's going to be across the board. But once you see the action plan, you'll get a better sense for that.
Thanks. And this isn't the only opportunity. Any folks who have any questions, comments, concerns, anything they want to raise, please send it to Keith and Mackenzie. Not necessarily, outside of the deadline. I mean, we're providing deadlines and timeframes, but the idea is if you have a good idea, question or concern, get it out there and pleased to respond to it. So thanks for those. Other questions or comments? Okay, so let me put a couple on the table. Before I started in the transportation world, I thought that in government, you always talk about ideas, and in the private sector, you talk about money. Well, what I'm learning the hard way is that in government, you got to talk about the money too. So I'm hoping that somewhere in here, we're going to be addressing the funding issues, like what are the most likely sources? Is it state? Is it federal? Is it local? Is it private sector is going to do this, and that kind of thing. So hopefully that's going to be woven in here somewhere. I have a larger procedural question, though. I wanted to make sure this group sees stuff before it goes to other committees. Is that going to happen or not? And the reason why is I just, if anyone has any particularly serious points of inaccuracy or what I'll call a blocking concern, that we know that before it goes out to other committees. So Keith and Mackenzie, I don't know if it's an alteration of the time frame or it underscores the time frame you have in mind, but I think it would be really good for this group to at least look at stuff, a couple days if necessary, even before it goes out to committees. So do you have any comments on that?
Sure, that's a very good question. The initial documentation that we'll be sending to the committees in for their meetings in this month will be material that you've already seen and commented on. We're not going to share the action plan with the committees in February because, for the very reason you state, you haven't seen it yet, and this committee needs to see it first. I should have said earlier, we for the TTSP draft, we did get comments, and we've pretty much incorporated all the comments that we've received in some way into the document. There was a couple of more significant ones from the last meeting. You may recall Dick Mudge had suggested an additional strategy related to accessibility, but we followed up offline after the last meeting and concluded that there is a strategy which already addresses accessibility, and I think we can modify that to kind of address the suggestions that Dick was making. And also in our conversations with Dick, to us it became apparent that we were maybe understating the role that we could play, certainly as NVTA staff, in helping in the education process related to major technology disruptors like autonomous vehicles. So I think we're going to enhance the actions related to any strategies that kind of speak to autonomous vehicles. So, but by and large, these are small changes to the material you've already seen. I'm certainly be happy to share with you what we share with the committees as well, so that you know what they're seeing. But I don't want to confuse you by sending you material you've already seen, and you feel as though you've got to comment on it again. That's a kind of situation I want to avoid. But we're always transparent. We'll always share stuff. But I think in terms of the immediate stuff that's going to the committees in February, there's nothing you haven't already seen and commented upon.
Okay, thank you for that. And probably, if you label it correctly, make clear that this has already been through a cycle of comment by us, that would be great. So anyway, thanks for that. Other questions, substantive questions, procedural questions, where we're going next with this? Okay, initially not seeing any. Keith and Mackenzie, anything else you wanted to add? And I want to turn to Monica Backman, because this committee ultimately is an advisory committee to her, and Monica has been the visionary that got all this started. So maybe Keith and Mackenzie, anything else that you wanted to add at this point? No? Okay.
Nothing from me on this, other than just as I said earlier, we'll be sending the action plan to you sometime between tomorrow and Friday of next week, but probably not as late as Friday of next week.
Okay, we look forward to seeing that, and then we'll need to talk about when we get public input and how we do that. Clearly, that we all view that as very important, but right now it's a substantive work of getting something down in paper and how we're going to actually implement it down in paper as a significant proposal. So, any other questions or comments from the group this morning?
Chair Snyder?
Marisha, yes.
Will we receive this presentation via email? Some of the questions would require some thought prior to providing any feedback.
Okay, so you need a reasonable time. Keith, what were you thinking?
My initial suggestion was 2 weeks, but if that's insufficient, then we can extend it. I would say that I mentioned bringing this for authority action in April. This is a self-imposed target, and if that is too ambitious and too aggressive, then we can relax that to allow more time until people feel comfortable with the material. But we felt we needed a target. So 2 weeks is the target we're suggesting for the action plan. But if you'd like longer, then please let us know.
No,
Okay.
that's fine. I just wanted to make sure that we received this presentation via email as a refresher.
We'll make this available after this meeting. Yes, Mayor Rochelle.
Thank you.
Other questions or comments? Okay, well, I think we've made great progress. I want to thank Monica and NVTA staff in particular. Monica, did you have any final words for us this morning?
Well, I just would like to thank everyone for taking a look at this. There are several initiatives that are underway that are really in line with this transportation technology strategic plan. And Mr. Snyder, you made a very good point about, public input and involvement. And I think when we get to a point where we're ready to incorporate some of this in transaction, we'll have additional comment opportunities, because that is really on the authorities' end that's going to spearhead some of the implementation processes. But we are not the only ones that can implement a lot of this stuff. We do have Kathy on, and a lot of you that represent other agencies and entities that can also help implement. But I appreciate your time on this. We really didn't know how this was going to take shape, because there are a lot of things when you say transportation and technology, seems like just a plethora of things that you can really pull from. But we're pleased to see that this is taking shape, and hopefully that it's in step and in line with several other things underway, so we can work in tandem. And lastly, hope to see you all at the ITS Roundtable event. Thank you, Mr. Snyder.
All right, thank you. Kathy, anything?
Thanks. I want to also compliment the staff on the great work they've done here. I've reviewed it and had an opportunity to talk to Keith and Mackenzie as they walked me through it, and that was really helpful. But I think it really intersects nicely with several efforts that VDOT has underway in terms of developing some strategic plans, as well as a new initiative that's identified a sort of strike force team for operations technology within VDOT. And so I think it's a great time. The timing of all of these initiatives is really coming together quite well. And I think we have an opportunity here to really have an impact with all of these efforts intersecting. So I'm really excited, and I thank the team for all the work that they've done.
Thank you very much. Anyone else want to raise anything at this point in the meeting? Okay. Well, Keith and Mackenzie, I think we've gone through the agenda. Anything else that you wanted us to go over this morning?
Chairman Snyder, I think there's an item for committee members to provide any updates relevant to their areas. I would like to note that we're joined this morning by Alison Malik from SAFE, Spring America's Future Energy. The previous member on the committee from SAFE, Greg Rogers, now works for Neuro. I believe he's also on the call, but I did want to mention Alison, thank her for joining the committee, I think for the first time.
Great, welcome, and thanks for participating. I guess one of the whole objectives here is resilience and sustainability, and in view of the U.S. being back in the Paris Accord, I think the target there, correct me, is carbon neutrality by 2050. So That's going to affect, and I think the Biden administration has made clear at that level that it's going to affect every agency and everything that they do, and transportation will need to play a key role. But affordability, accessibility, equity are all fundamental issues as well. So it's challenging, but I think we're up to it. So thanks very much. Any final questions or comments? Okay, not seeing any, so we'll entertain a motion to adjourn.
So moved.
Thank you, Mayor. Is there a second?
Second.
Hey, thank you. All those in favor, signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed? All right, thank you all very much for the work. Look forward to seeing you hopefully at the next couple events that we mentioned.
Yeah.
Take care.
Thank you.
everyone.
Thanks, all.
Thank you, Chair Snyder. Thank you.
Bye.
Yep, take care.